Sure. We're good to go. So, hey, introduce us real quickly. If you haven't seen us or worked with us before, I've got a longtime friend, Jeff. What have we known each other now since 1970? Oh, probably 71, 69. I don't know. Aging
I
us
have to say
both.
it's getting close to 50 years.
Yeah, it's over that. I'm guessing. But anyway, I'm Stephen Oliver, and this is Jeff Smith. Jeff has the interesting background of owning multiple businesses, having tons of employees, both as a general manager as well as a multi-location owner himself, and now working with me and coaching a myriad of businesses all over, I'd say North America, but the world, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, we can go on and on and on. And everybody has the same problems, more or less. They think it's unique, but it really isn't. And then I'm Stephen Oliver, and I've been working with financial advisors for many, many years, and in the business owner and marketing side of things, what, Jeff, for 50 years. Well, since 83, I guess, really, and intensely studying marketing. But what we wanted to talk about on the podcast and or video, however you're picking this up today, is practice management, which has to do with employee management. But Jeff, let me start with by describing it this way. We've had an awful lot of clients who, after we've worked with them for a while, my favorite quote, and I would attribute it if I remember who it was, but we had somebody who was exploring working with us who talked to a current member, and the answer was, "Wow, I don't know, but that guy found money laying around my practice that I didn't know existed." Right? We had another one who said, "Wow, I don't know, but those guys sure turn shacks into mansions." I thought that was a good one too, but I really like the found money laying around my business that I didn't know existed. And I was lamenting to you I was at to set the stage without embarrassing anybody here, is at a big office with the number one producer in the organization, in that particular office anyway, and having a conversation about practice management, about staff, and one thing or another. And it was specifically tied in this case to marketing, but it could have been on a variety of issues. But you and I were just kind of laughing about this, but let me set the stage. So the stage number one, and Jeff, you remember when we acquired the company down in Tampa, we found the same problem happening, right? Is the phone by the person they needed to talk to was being answered for about 4 hours once a week, or calls were being returned.
Right.
Um,
Didn't know what the other one was doing all over the place.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but in this case, let me set the stage. So we're having a conversation, and I had shown up specifically, prearranged to meet with three people. The primary advisor who's got a 2 point something a year revenue stream as an advisor, well into the seven figures on premium income every year, has a couple $100 million assets under management. I think 205 or 7,000 or so, 207 million AUM, I believe, in that shooting range anyway. And we're having a conversation about incoming calls, outbound calls, appointment scheduling, and so forth. And it more or less goes like this. I'm going to give the encapsulation, right? Is I'm number one working with them on really massively, ramping up the amount of inbound prospects they have, but also picking up money laying around on the floor. In this case, he has a list of about 300 clients who have been undersold, if you will. There's a lot of opportunity in that list. He has another 150 clients who aren't being touched enough, and another 150 clients who should be, getting dripped on and touched and invited to meetings and so forth a lot, but they're not. So there's a lot of opportunity right there. I keep saying this could be a $5 million a year thing without any new blood, just by fixing these holes, right? And you
And
know,
that is the biggest mistake that a lot of people make, is that they're looking for that new person when, yes, we have that. That's one edge of the sword, but the business income is a two-edged sword. You've got to, keep the clients you have, but you got to make sure that you maximize the value. And
Yeah.
that's why we always look at the value of each of the clients, on the average, what are they bringing in and what should they, be adding to the business.
Yeah, what's the average client bringing in every month? If it's purely a commission income, are you doing the best job possible to generate referrals? Are you doing the best job possible to stay in touch and to look at what additional needs they have? And there's so many. Ogilvy, who was a famous advertising agency, Madison Avenue, but a real strong direct response marketing guy. The TV show Mad Men was in part based upon Ogilvy. Every now and then through that they mention him. And Ogilvy on Advertising, by the way, is one of the best books on advertising I think ever. But his conversation was, you're always marketing to a moving parade of humanity, not a standing army. Now, what he meant by that, which is a conversation I keep having in this case, is just because you talked to somebody or got your message across to them or whatever a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, doesn't mean their life looks the same right now, right? Dan Kennedy tells a story based on that, and he talks about, and Jeff, we can both unfortunately identify with his story, but he talks about he thinks he's happily married, shows up one day, and the wife has moved out and loaded up all the furniture, right? And left him with the cat and with one chair. And so in the week before that happened, people are sending him flyers, inserts in the newspaper, mailings, billboards, all this stuff on furniture. He's immune to it. He's got a house. His furniture's good enough. He's got plenty. And the day after the wife moves out, whoever gets to him next is making a huge ass sale, right? Of furniture, right? And that's the way it is with your clients. Is, if I talked to somebody and told them, in this case, a term policy 18 months ago, and felt that was like the only thing that was available to do with them at the time, who knows what's happened in the meantime? Maybe there's been an inheritance. Maybe there's been a job situation change. Maybe they just got married rich. Maybe they got divorced to the wife or the husband who was the cog in the wheel of getting any more movement going. You never know, right? Jeff, we see this all the time, right? We have a bunch of clients whose income has quadrupled in the last 18 months under our tutelage, and we can take at least partial credit for that.
Even during these trying times, our people have been, doubling and tripling their gross, and it's because they're actually capitalizing on all these different sources of income that they can add to their business.
Absolutely. So, but anyway, we're going through this conversation, and let's start with the phone number conversation, right? So here it is. There's a phone number on, and he's a captive, agent, advisor. So they've got the, the main corporate website. He can set up his own website within certain parameters within it. So I'm going through, looking at it, going, well, okay, there's no appointment scheduling link here. Can we get that to happen? There's no real direct to anybody, but okay, at least there's a phone number and an address, and anybody who's looking for you, they're not going to get in the car and drive to Central Denver and walk in on the 37th floor. They're going to call you. Where does the phone number go to? Well, so we figure out it goes to the lady at the front desk, but the lady at the front desk, who by the way is very competent, I don't have any criticism with her, but if our guy isn't there, it goes to his voicemail. Now, he has 2 full-time employees, 1 part-time employee. None of them know how to check his voicemail, nor have they been instructed to check his voicemail, nor have any of them walked to the front desk and told the nice lady at the front desk that if Peter's not here, please direct all incoming calls to me. Or even if Peter is here, direct the incoming calls to me, and then I'll field it and forward it over to Peter if it's appropriate. And that conversation never happened, right? So nobody's ever thought about it. And the next question.
Better for a live. I mean, we know that a live person is always going to be better than a voice message, and you got immediate contact with them. You don't have to then try to chase them down to return their call.
Yeah, and so important that we always make sure that we set it up so a live human being is answering literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that then means that it'll go to a live person, let's say normal business hours, 9 to 5. But I would prefer it to go to a staff member until say 9 p.m. So if you have staff who are working from home, okay, fine, buy them all a secure cell phone or forward it or whatever. But I'll have a staff member answering at 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then we'll have a live answering service answering it, from 9 p.m. until 9 a.m., right? And so, but, sometimes you have compliance issues with that and so forth. But at the very least, if somebody's calling you during business hours, they should get hold of a live person. And I don't mean a person at the desk answering phone calls for 90 people. What I mean is a person that works directly for you, with you, or you, so that the problem can be solved, right? So then we're going through the conversation of, we have a part-timer, half-time person, working supposedly 9 a.m. to 2 or 10 to 2, pretty much 5 days a week, who's supposed to be making outbound calls to clients and following up with prospects to schedule appointments. And the frustration being expressed is, this person says to me, he's not there. Another problem we'll discuss. Person says to me, he makes calls, but nobody gets back to him, or nobody answers the phone. Well, Jeff, let's talk about that. Why does nobody answer the phone nowadays?
Well, first of all, nobody answers their home phone anymore. And every time they have it, everybody has caller ID. And if that doesn't come up in their directory, or they don't recognize the number, they know it's a solicitor or somebody who is wasting their time, or they're not interested in talking to, so they're going to ignore it.
Yeah. And maybe expanding on that is, as we have shifted from landlines to cell phones, and frankly, even if somebody still has a landline, an awful lot of people don't, but landlines tend to be, like in my house, there's a landline, but it's for the fax and it's for the alarm system, right? And by the way, yeah, I still have a fax. Most people don't have a fax anymore either. But I don't even know what the phone number is to the landline. It doesn't ring to any physical phones. The phone I use, which is what's happening mostly, is cell phone, right? And what happens with cell phones is the only number, we can talk about this too, that this is changing a little bit, but predominantly what happens is, if somebody does an outbound call to a cell phone, unless you're in their contacts record, is they see a phone number that doesn't put a name to the phone number, right? So if somebody gets a call that's unidentified, they tend not to answer the phone. So 95% of them aren't going to answer an unidentified number. In fact, it's so bad, my iPhone is set up so that if it's not in my favorites, it doesn't even ring the phone, right? And if it's an unidentified number, either if they text or if they call, it doesn't notify me. It just goes into an unidentified, and I can go look at it later maybe, which I don't do. So now let's take the scenario of, I've got the part-timer. He's got his own unique phone number. In this case, it was being handled through Ring Central. And he's making outbound calls for the lead advisor. The lead advisor feels like, I have a relationship with these people, so they should pick up the phone. But the part-timer is calling from a different phone number than the lead advisor, right? So now the lead advisor's phone number might be in their contacts, probably is, but the employee's number is not in their contacts, because he's never shared a contact record, what we call a V card or one thing or another. He's never shared that with his clients. He's never made a significant effort to have all the different numbers from his office. And as I count it, there's I think 6 different numbers. There's the main company number, there's his main number, there's his cell phone, there's this part-timer's number, there's a full-time insurance person's number, there's a full-time CFP advisor, financial guy that works there, there's his number. Now I think I'm skipping one, but there's a bunch of different numbers right there under his little umbrella. But the only number that most of his clients would have is his cell phone number, not any of his employees, right? So now he's mad that a part-timer is making outbound calls and saying to him that most people don't answer their phone. Well, that's just the way the world works. I mean, the kid didn't really even need to say that. I mean, that's just what happens now, right, Jeff?
All the
Now,
time.
now let's give it an additional example. So I'm down there on Thursday. This part-timer who's also a college student isn't there. And then they have another little staff luncheon on Friday. He's again not there. Has a migraine. He isn't there on Thursday, Friday. Well, okay, so the kid worked now 3 days that week, not 5 days that week, and he worked more or less, to be generous, 9:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. So if he makes an outbound call at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and somebody doesn't answer their phone and he leaves a voice message and says, "Hi, I'm calling for," I won't give their names, but I'm calling for, so-and-so, and he wanted to schedule a time to do a quarterly or a biannual review of your situation. And I wanted to schedule an appointment, see when's good for you. And now what does he say next? "Please give me a call back."
Of which I'm not going to answer because I'm only going to be here for another hour.
And then at 2 o'clock, you beat me to it. At 2 o'clock, his line goes unanswered or goes to voicemail, which if he had called on Wednesday is getting checked maybe on Monday, right? In this scenario. And so if they call back, and it's probably right that they're going to call back in many cases, they're not going to get him. Now, this is so common in our society, we call it what? Phone tag, right?
Yeah.
So now what happens? Yeah, it's also called a circle jerk, from World War II parlance there, Jeff. Or it's called a cluster, fill in the blank. But so now he gets the voicemail on Monday. He calls them at the same period. They probably haven't put his number in their database yet. And he's calling them in the same time block that they didn't answer the phone the first time they didn't answer the phone. And what's happening now? He's leaving a message. "I was following up with you. I still wanted to schedule that appointment. Give me a call back."
People don't understand that their window to reach people, everybody's a little different. Not everybody's in that same time frame. Some people are tied up in the morning, some are tied up in the afternoons, heck, some are even tied up in the evening, but not everybody has the same schedule. And that's why it's always critical, whoever's doing those calls, to make sure that they're tracking the time they're calling so they can call in that next window, and then somebody else is calling in the next window, or the same person, but making sure that you're tracking, because you got to try all three windows before you get them. That is, if they followed the format of having your number even in their directory to know that it's you, that they want to answer it. It's not that they don't want to answer it sometimes, it's that they cannot answer it during that time because their job or their business keeps them, like most people, occupied, and they can't answer their phone 24/7.
Yeah. And so let's do a diagnosis on this to begin with, and we'll expand on it a little bit. But one piece of the diagnosis is you have to get your contact record into their phone. And if it's a new prospect coming into your pipeline, that's the first priority, right? So we'll have it be where, not to get too detailed on marketing, but a landing page, then it's automated to send them a text message. And in the text message, it'll say, "Oh, and by the way, here's our contact information. Please just tap it and put add to contacts."
Which is so easy now, because when you share the link, now all they have to do is hit it and it opens, and then it gives you the choice of saving it.
Yeah.
And so it's just a one finger touch and go.
Yeah. And see, so that can be done with every new prospect that comes in. It can also be done the first time I talk to somebody on the phone. Let's say it's a referral, and Mrs. Jones says, I'd like you to talk to my cousin. she's got a real need. In fact, if you have a moment, I'll call her now. Okay, so now I'm on a three-way call with them. I can say, Sue, if you can give me your number, I'll text you over my contact record. Did you see that text? Okay, just tap it and now put add to contacts or create new contact. And now you'll have all my contact information there. I can do it on the phone. Somebody meets me in my office, I can say, I don't remember if we added my contact record to your phone. Here, let me text that over to you right now. And then let's just, and you do the same thing, right? Well, so now, if you call somebody, and by the way, the contact record could be, in this case, it could be the front desk number, it could be the direct number, it could be each of the employees' number, it could be any number that might do an outbound call if there's any different phone numbers. It could be the address. It can be every email address. That was another question. I will come up to that for a second. But in this case, the assistant was sending emails from his own email address rather than the main advisor's email address, right? So you've got again another situation where, but you could have each of the staff members' email addresses. Now, in some cases, if I add it to my iPhone is going to tell mail that they're in my approved thing, so they're less likely to get spam blocked, right, or put into a spam filter. Google will do the same thing, right? So if you have it all set up on an Android, is your Gmail will know now that they're a known contact and will be less likely.
A company name with 3 or 4 emails under it, and any one of those come in, it'll show that company name, and then you're more likely, because if they're like me, when I get my hundreds of emails each day, when I'm looking through them, if I recognize a name, very seldom, it's harder to remember an email, but if it's tied to a company name, you know it. Or if you look at what the email, what the information line is, and then you recognize that, oh yeah, I need to talk to that person or contact that person. Let me touch on it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other part of that conversation. I want to finish on the first part, but what was happening is the same part-timer was doing an outbound call, and then he was doing an email to the people. But the email was saying, I'm trying to connect to you and schedule an appointment for the lead advisor, right? Now, what it wasn't doing is giving them a calendar link to say, it's very important that we set a time to meet in person or by phone or by Zoom in the next 30 to 45 days. If you could just click this link, you can schedule a time that works for both of you, and we'll stop playing phone tag. Well, they wasn't doing that. Guess what the email was saying? If you can please give me a call.
And then here comes the vicious circle again.
And so now, our rule of thumb is anytime you do an outbound call, you make sure that they either have or get your contact record into their phone, right? But then what we'll do is we'll leave a voicemail. Big chunk of the population doesn't use voicemail anymore, if you didn't know it. We'll send a text, and then we'll send an email. And Jeff, one of the things I find with, life agents, financial advisors, with everybody in this kind of RIAs in this realm, is they use email a lot to communicate with LPL or with Northwest Mutual or with their corporate office. They'll use email to deal with policies, DocuSign, one thing or another. And so they don't realize that most of the world has moved on from email, right? So, and a lot of your clients might be 70, but the next generation, I got to tell you, they're not using email, and they're not using voicemail, and they're not using voice. They're not talking on the phone. They're using text messaging and Instagram and Twitter and all this. I noticed I didn't even say Facebook. The younger ones aren't using Facebook. That's for old folks.
The things you're talking about are so important because they actually make your time so much more productive, and it creates a system that you're working smarter, not harder. You're actually working less because you don't have to go into so many circles in trying to contact and frustrate your staff because they're unable to get through to somebody. And you're talking about just learning a few systems. And once you learn it, you apply it to all of them and it ties in. And that's why you got to get smarter in your business. It's not about working harder. We're not talking about putting in a lot more hours and this and that, but it's just talking about educating yourself on a few simple systems that make everything across the line, make it so much easier.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, we were having the conversation in the middle of all this is, you know, I had said at one point in this conversation, I said, well, how many people are we trying to communicate with? Well, I may have mentioned before, there's one group of 386 people, and there's another group of 150 or 100, and then there's a second group of 150. And they're more or less in order of priority of this 100, and then the 150, and they need to be cross-referenced with the 386, if that description made sense. And I said, well, okay, why don't we take the 150 and we'll send them a text message from the lead guy, and it'll include a scheduling link, and the message can be, hey, we've been playing phone tag. I just wanted to give you an easy way to schedule our follow-up visit. My schedule for the next 2.5 months is right here. If you could just, you know, schedule it at your convenience on a time that works in my schedule, we will stop playing phone tag. And he looked.
So many businesses are doing that. They're getting smarter. My doctor just sent me a link because the appointment that I had scheduled with him, he had to cover the emergency room at the hospital for one of his doctor friends. And so he was having to reschedule his patients. He sent me the schedule for the week and asked me to pick a time that worked for me. And I just went in and hit it. And as soon as I hit it, then I got a text back that said, your appointment has been confirmed. Then I got an email from him that said in that email, just click on it if you're going to need to reschedule it.
Yeah.
And so here's saved him or his staff calling all of these patients trying to get a hold of them to reschedule.
Yeah. And by the way, if they're smart, somebody is reconciling the list, possibly in an automated fashion, to know anybody who didn't do that themselves, for them to put a human on following up, right? And or to run it through the same cycle again, and if they still didn't do it themselves, to put a human to follow up on them, right?
And that's the thing, is you get a good percentage of them, and the more you do it, and the more we move into the modern technology, the more people get it, because right now we still have a few of the older generation that is not as savvy on that stuff, like you said, whereas that younger or middle generation is a lot more savvy and can do that, and would rather do that kind of stuff.
Well, and a lot of advisors have been hesitant to move to text messaging, and they're hesitant for a couple of reasons. The one legitimate reason is they're scared to death of their compliance people, and what can't happen is, in most cases, is you don't have a secure enough text link and you don't have enough of a record in order to execute trades and so forth, right? And by the way, there are very secure text messaging systems that are specifically designed for financial advisors that you can get. However, my argument is always this: if I have a landing page and it's a prospect, I'm not scheduling anything confidential. All I'm doing is I'm following up and reminding them to schedule an appointment for the next step. If it's a client, and I can have as long as a disclaimer as I want in the text messaging, don't send back any personal information. This is purely designed to help us schedule an appointment. I mean, you can put whatever you want in there legally, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out of the human factor as much as possible, and we're trying to get out of the phone tag crap as much as possible, right? And so, again, what we know, Jeff, is very clearly is email is dying a slow and painful death. COVID revived it a little bit. Most advisors are fooled into thinking the whole world uses email, at the same level that they're using it, right? Hell, my CPA still faxes me over stuff. Well, that's great. I mean, okay, that's fine. He's in that mode. I still have an e-fax number that comes in. But you know me, I mean, God, I don't know what I get every day, probably 300 emails. But the only emails I ever see.
Whenever I send an email, I always follow it with a text to say, I just sent you an email, take a look, and now they know to look for it, and you got it. So
there you go.
If you just send an email, it gets lost in the shuffle. You never know if they got it, but you know if they get a text, because 90, such a higher percentage of texts get looked at, because most people will, their phone will beep or something, they'll take a look, and then they'll either ignore it if they don't recognize it, or they'll respond to it.
Yeah, it's more or less a 98% open rate on text with maybe a 20% open rate on email. Email has deliverability problems, especially in the older legacy systems like AOL, Yahoo. They'll just throw away a bunch of them randomly.
Well,
but even in
such a big chunk of them anyway, right off the top.
Yeah, and like Google, Google will go to the spam box, but if it doesn't go to the spam box, it'll go to the promotional box, right? So you're sending it from your corporate email address, and they put it in the promotional rather than in the personal, which is where most people, the only place they look anyway, right? So, and then, advisors all the time say, I have a great relationship with my client. They look at anything I send them. It's like, yeah, right, BS. If they're ignoring most everybody else's stuff, they're ignoring your stuff too, unintentionally, if for no other reason, right? And Jeff, you know me, I have now 6 different email addresses. I have one that I have to open a secure computer over here that I only look at if I get a text that says go look at it over there. And then I have another one, the Stephen Oliver Advisor, wealthmastery.com, that I rarely look at. And then I have the other email addresses. It's like, well, okay. And people think that's going to work. Now let's talk about the other elephant in the room in this story, staff management, right? So I'm not making a mountain out of a molehill on this deal. I mean, this is legitimate issues. But so we're having the meeting, and we've got a part-timer who's arguably responsible for the most important driver of the business. He's responsible for setting an appointment with each and every new prospect, whether it's a referral from a $50 million client, or whether it's an online form filled out. So he's responsible for doing an outbound call to schedule an appointment. He's also responsible for taking the 100 most valuable clients and making sure that they have a quarterly meeting with the lead advisor and soon to be the associate advisor. Well, if you've got what's already $2.5 million in revenue, that's dependent upon somebody who is part-time, ill-trained, poorly supervised, and flaky, then what you're doing is you're putting your entire revenue flow on this, and in this case he's a junior, I think, in college. This person who this is a side gig for him. Does that sound like a good idea to you, Jeff?
I tell you, it's not that hard to train them to and make a few adjustments. It's that training smarter to get more production, make it more productive and easy process. No, some people say it's always easy when you know how to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands, of part-timers you and I have had in our direct employee over the years, and how many thousands are currently working for our different clients all over the world. But there's a commonality, and you're the sports guy. I'm horrible at sports analogies, but my analogy has always been, I think of it as the quarterback with the huddle, right? And in this case, correct me if I'm wrong, there's some guy sitting back there with a headset on calling the plays, and then there's the quarterback who's communicating that to everybody else, right? Is that more or less
You about got it on 95% of them.
a halfway decent description. I know there might be somebody up in the box or whatever, but anytime I use a sports analogy, it's suspect. But I always thought of the part timers is it's like you're having to do a huddle, right? So if I have this college kid, I at the very least am going to have a little staff huddle, and this is with the full timers too. I'm going to have a little staff huddle at the beginning of the day, and I'm going to have a little staff huddle at the end of the day, right? And at the end of the day, I want to know what happened, who have we talked to, what appointments have we scheduled, what new inbound prospects do we have, how many new appointments that we schedule, what do I have, and I'm going to want to know what do I have tomorrow, what's on our agenda tomorrow, what's our activities. And at the beginning of the day, I'm going to have our mission today is schedule 5 new appointments with clients, whatever it might be, right? I'm going to put everybody on a mission. But the thing that I have always found about full timers and part timers, to me, all my full time staff, and you and I both had them spread out all over. In this case, all over a metro area, right? And now we have people spread out all over the world. But I was having a huddle with them. In this case, it could be by Zoom, at least 3 times a week for all the full timers, right? But with all the part timers, it was at least once a day, but really more often it was like once an hour, right? How many calls did you make for the last hour? Who did you talk to? Who did you not talk to? What did you follow up?
Make them track it. Make them make sure that they have the list, but then they've got to be writing and putting their comments about didn't answer, left a message, and that way you can see what their productivity is and know whether they need more training or you've got to change your system around because it's not working. A lot of people just keep doing the same thing over and over, thinking it's going to get better, not changing the system. And that's the most important thing.
I think that was Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results.
And that's what I hate to say it. That's what most businesses do. They don't know how to, because they don't have anybody to help them or show them. And a lot of times it's because they didn't know there were people out there that could help them with their business. That's why what you're doing is so important and so helpful, and how these businesses were able to double their gross or have big increases from one year to the next. Even during the pandemic, it's amazing the numbers and record years that our members had during and through that pandemic. And this is still the aftermath, but it's still, we're kind of in the pandemic with a lot of the states.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned that's a tangent, but an awful lot of advisors didn't adapt to going from, let's say, lunch or dinner meetings to webinar or Zoom meetings. They didn't adapt from, I'm going to have all my meetings at my office and they're going to come down face to face, to I'm going to shift to Zoom. And I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands, of sales we've closed face to face on Zoom, not face to face, belly to belly, right now. And ever since Zoom was invented, I mean, I don't know, we were probably one of the top first 100 users. You remember, Jeff? They'd been, and it was an outgrowth or a staff member who spun out of GoToMeeting, and you probably remember. I always hated GoToMeeting. I thought it was just a abysmal pain in my ass, and we immediately started utilizing Zoom. But so let's stay with the employee side of it. Is one mistake I see made is, here's a list of 150 people. I need you to work on calling them every day, and we want to have X amount of spaces on my calendar each week for client reviews, right? Now, in that sentence, nowhere have I said the person in charge, to use Apple's terminology, is you. You're responsible for 10 new meetings scheduled per week. Or you're responsible for 10 meetings a week scheduled over the next 2 months, done by the 15th of the month. Right? Big difference in delegation. One is kind of, I prefer to think of it as abdication, is here's the list, go work on the list. And Jeff, I tell my the Apple story a lot. I think it was an article in Forbes magazine. As you know, any book on a number of people ever written, I've read, but one of them is Jobs, of course. And the story about Jobs is each new vice president that was hired or promoted within the company, and they had a number of them. I think they had 125 or something like that. Is he would sit down and he would have a conversation with them, and he would say, in the company here, there's a continuum of responsibility, and there are places where if somebody has a reason, an excuse why something didn't get done, that's okay. They can tell us why it didn't get done, and we can somebody else can figure it out for them and solve it. For instance, if the janitor who empties the trash can in my office every day goes 2 or 3 days and hasn't emptied the trash, and we sit down and talk to him, and he says, well, somebody changed the lock to the key on the office, nobody gave me the new key, so I couldn't do it. See, that's okay, right? But he says at the level of, there's a level along the continuum from CEO to janitor where nobody cares about the excuses anymore. And that's the job you've just been promoted into, is you no longer have the opportunity to say, nobody gave me the key, or that person hasn't given me, or this was a problem over here. You have, and this is the thing I like from West Point in Annapolis, right, is, the new cadet is taught, or new plebe is taught, there's only 4 possible responses. Yes, sir, no, sir, I don't understand, sir, or no excuses, sir, right? That's a really good lesson. It's that accountability factor, right? Apple also calls it the person in charge, the PIC. For any project, there's ultimately one person who has full responsibility. He can delegate in any way he sees fit, but one person in charge. So if it succeeds, they get the credit. If it fails, it's their ass, right? And in this case, in this conversation, one, there was no person in charge. There was a person that was handed a task list. Number 2 is ultimately he wanted the full-timer to be the person in charge, but the full-timer had no ability to hire, fire, discipline, hold to the carpet the person that was working for him. Well, now that doesn't work either, right? Other than just, here's somebody I'm going to file over there and have no usefulness for, and I'm going to have to do all the activities, because if I can't hold them responsible, nothing happens. You've seen situations like that too, haven't you, Jeff?
More than once.
Usually it's the cousin's on payroll, the son is on payroll, a lot of times it's nepotism of some sort, right?
And in the old, what gets measured gets done. So if there's nobody tracking the progress of it and the results of it, then it doesn't get done anyway. Everybody just kind of spins their wheels.
Yeah. And I always liked, you and I were big fans of Zig Ziglar, may he rest in peace. But he wrote a great book called Peak Performers. And in that book, I think that's what it was called anyway. I may have misquoted that, but I think it was right. But he had a great story, in this case about a real estate office. But he said, here's the deal, is, you're hired, here's your desk, here's your phone, here's your, responsibility. Here's the minimum level of production required for you to have that desk. Here's our goal. Here's what success is. And here's the minimum level of production that's required for you to have that desk.
To keep your job.
Yeah. Well, what happens if I don't hit that minimum level of performance? Well, we give your desk to somebody else. Well, what does that mean? It means you get a wonderful opportunity to look for a career path that's more in keeping with your skill set. Right? But that's the kind of conversation you've got to have. The minimum expected performance for you in this role is, pick a number, is you make 7 appointments a week. And if you make 7 appointments for a week, I'm not going to pat you on the back and I'm not going to yell at you. That's the minimum required for you to sit at that desk, and by the way, for a check to show up, whatever period of time that happens. Well, what happens if I can't get 7 appointments a week? Well, we need to find somebody who can get 7 appointments per week. Well, what do I need to do that? Well, here's the list of tools that you have. You just need to make sure that you do it. And all of a sudden now you have somebody who, instead of turning off the phone at 2 o'clock and leaving, or turning off the phone at 4 o'clock, you have a conversation with them about, some people are going to answer the phone at 10 a.m. and some people are going to answer it at 2 p.m. and some people are going to answer the phone at 5 and some people are going to answer the phone at 7 at night. So maybe what you want to do is structure your work so that you can rotate through them at different times. And by the way, when they return your call, they're not necessarily going to return the call from 10 to 2. You might want to have your work phone and have them also in your database. So if it's somebody you're playing phone tag with, you answer the phone, right? So you can have a conversation like that. But I've always found, one, if you don't have the person in charge, ultimately that's you, but if you don't have the person in charge, you have a problem. Number two, if you let them have excuses, you have a problem, right? Going back to Ziegler, he used to call that loser's limp. He had again, I'm using a football analogy. I'm horrible at this. But he would talk about, the guys running down the field with the ball, receiver, right? Okay, the receiver is running down the field with the ball, and the other guy, whatever he's called, is chasing him. And if the guy with the ball outruns him, half the time the guy chasing him ends up limping. And what it is Zig would call that the loser's limp. And what it was a plea for sympathy rather than I just didn't run fast enough and I wasn't motivated enough to catch that guy.
I would have caught him if I hadn't have pulled a muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pulled a hamstring. That was always the excuse.
Yeah, it's not my fault. I was injured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have gotten him if I hadn't hurt myself or got injured.
Yeah, so it's got to be no excuses, who's the person in charge, and it's got to be managing by results way more than managing by activity, right? I can tell somebody your job is to call these 150 people. Well, that's not what I want. What I want is I want every one of them scheduled for a review meeting within the next 90 days. So your job is to have 10 review meetings this week, 10 review next week, and to have me booked up with 10 a week.
Your job is to fill my calendar.
Yeah. And here's what that means.
To me, every slot is close them, but I got to get somebody that can fill up my calendar.
Yeah, and that means this many over this period of time with this deadline, right? It's the same as any goals. You got to have a concrete objective. You've got incremental objectives. You've got to have a deadline, a due by date, right? So if you don't have that, you got nothing going on. And Jeff, we could go on and on staff management for freaking ever, right? But a couple of other things I see happen a lot is I forget who it was. May have been Brian Tracy or Danny Cox, one of those guys. But they dubbed what I also see happen a lot is seagull management. Remember seagull management? Our one of our joint teachers and employers was really good at this. Seagull manager means every now and then you come in, you squawk a lot, you make a lot of noise, you shit all over everybody, and then you fly away and you ignore it for a while, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Seagull management is not a good thing. Doing a once a year performance review is worthless. What you need to be doing is doing a daily performance review. You need to delegate with responsibility, delegate with concrete numbers on expectations, and inspect what you expect. And that has to be the lower somebody is on the hierarchy, and the less full-time they are, or the newer they are, the more supervision they need. Oftentimes, the more senior they are and the longer time they've been there, and it's a full-time career for them, and they're paid on commission or they're paid incentive, they need less supervision.
A lot of them take too long to do that inspect. It's got to be on a daily or bi-weekly, weekly or a couple times a week. You got to be looking at their numbers. You can't wait till the month, and now we've wasted a whole month because they were so unproductive. You got to check it on a daily and a weekly and keep making sure that your month is going the way it should be.
Yeah. We'll Jeff, we'll do it. We're at about our 45-minute point here, so we probably should wrap this one up, and we'll come back and do a couple more sessions on the great value and problems of having staff. But I would just leave everybody with a couple of things, right? Anytime you're frustrated with the people that's working for you, it's again to steal from Ziegler. He always called it when you're pointing this way, you got three fingers pointing right back at you. In almost all cases, it's a lack of training, a lack of supervision, or hiring the wrong person, right? And the the amount of supervision somebody needs is to great extent dependent upon how motivated they are, how long they've been there, and how well they've been trained. And so you've got to really be thinking about how you get that level of training early on, how you get the level of motivation. And putting somebody on a financial incentive is a good step. It's not adequate, though. Is most people are frankly going to be better if you say, your drop dead to have the desk is 10 a week. And that's the point at which I'm neither going to pat you on the back nor fire you. And at this level, you get a bonus, and at this level, you get a bonus. And if you get this level, we're all going to have a party, rent a limo, and you'll get a week off, right? But I've got to give them what's the
important for them to know that you also have to evaluate: is it their aptitude? Is it you're not showing them, or is it they're not capable of learning? And you've got to identify that right away, because we want them to have a good attitude, but if they don't have the aptitude, we're showing them and we keep showing them the same and they keep making the same mistakes, then maybe they're in the wrong field.
Yeah. And you and I have both told people for years, with any staff member, there's aptitude, and whoever I stole it from years ago, but you can't teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time, it irritates the pig, right? And so you've got to make sure that they're smart enough, that they're capable enough, that they have the skill set to do, and the skill set, I mean, they have the capability of learning what the task is that you want to do. Very rarely do I ever try to hire somebody who has the specific skills we need. I train them on that. But what I want them to do is I want them to have the ability to learn, right? And then number two, they've got to have the motivation. And I also expect them to bring that to the job. More often than not, what I see is people are highly motivated when they take the job, and then everything is so Mickey Mouse around them that it demotivates them. So it's easy to destroy somebody's motivation. But frankly, you don't need to have a big, motivational pep rally 3 times a week for most people. If they know what their objectives are and they know what their incentives are and they know what's required of them, they'll either bring the motivation to the job or they don't. And then the third thing is they've got to be trained, and they have to be trained thoroughly. And by that, I don't mean here's the training manual, go read it, or I mean you walk them through, you role play it, you hold their hand, you do it, and you let them watch you do it. They do it, and you watch them and rescue them, and then you let them do it, and you record it, and then you let them do a series, and probably forever you have them record it and have them listen to their own conversation with people. But they've got to have that type of intensive level of training, or nothing else good happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we'll call it a day, and hopefully this has been valuable for everybody. I'll remind everybody, if you're not listening to this on Apple or Google or Stitcher or whatnot, our podcast is on all the major podcast platforms. Make sure you're subscribed to that. And I guess I should remind everybody that we have a free offer for already successful advisors who are looking to massively accelerate their practice growth, grow their AUM and so forth. If you go to advisorwealthmastery.com, you'll find more information there, and it's a completely free offer. We can see if it makes any sense for us to work together or not. At the very least, you'll get a lot of great ideas and get to model some of the things that we're doing as well.
Remember to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and let's get all of the staff to work harder and smarter. How's that for a deal? Let's not forget that part. Okay, again, my rule of thumb was always, I'm not, I don't want to be stressed out every day, but I am a carrier, and I want to make sure that the responsibility is down at the front line where it needs to be, and that I've properly delegated, not abdicated responsibility for those things. On that note, we'll call it a day. Give me a second and I will stop the live cast if I can remember how to do that.